We have started looking at the fifth commandment in our time of confession of sin. And the fifth commandment, I will remind you, says we are, all of us, to honor our father and mother, that your days may be long in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. Last week, Daniel looked at question 124 of the larger catechism, reminding us that by father and mother is meant anyone who is superior to us in age or gifts or status, exercising authority whether in family, church, or state. Question 125, the next question of the larger catechism, asks the question, why are superiors styled father and mother? Now, don't get caught up on that word styled. It simply means to name something. It's an old English way of saying it. But the answer to the question in the catechism is this. Superiors are styled father and mother both to teach them in all duties toward their inferiors, like natural parents, to express love and tenderness to them according to their several relations, and to work inferiors to a greater willingness and cheerfulness in performing their duties to their superiors as to their parents. This takes the commandment a further step. This is why I spent 2 Sundays a few weeks ago talking about the breadth of the commandments. Last week, we learned that the words father and mother refers to superiors in all walks of life. This week, we learned that the fifth commandment does not just express the duties that children owe their parents or that inferiors owe their superiors. We learned this week that there are duties that parents owe their children, and by extension, that superiors owe inferiors. And we can see these progressions in the Bible. We can see it in the letters of Paul. For instance, in Ephesians 6:4, Paul admonishes fathers not to provoke their children to anger, but to bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And later, in 1 Thessalonians 2:7 and 8, Paul says that while he was among the people of Thessalonica, he was gentle among them, just as a nursing mother cherishes her own children. So, affectionately longing for you, says Paul, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but our own lives, because you had become dear to us. Paul regarded the flock of Christians at Thessalonica as his very own children. So, the fifth commandment shows duties that superiors owe to their inferiors. I want you to let that sink in for a little bit and ponder all the relationships you have where you are superior to someone else. Some of these relationships are fairly obvious. Elders and pastors are to be as parents to the flock, as Paul said in 1 Thessalonians 2:7. But it also means that teachers are to treat their students as their own children. It means that employers are to treat their employees that way. It means that government officials are to treat the people that they serve as their own children. And I suspect all of us have had times at the DMV where we wish the person behind the counter knew this commandment and its implications. Later in the catechism, we'll learn that some of the duties that superiors owe inferiors, like parents owe their children, are to love them, to pray for them, and to bless them. And this is not always easy, as parents well know, because sometimes children act like, well, children. The parent still has to love them, pray for them, and bless them. Likewise, when you're in a superior relationship, you are to perform these same duties. The principle is exactly the same. That means that elders are to bless their flock, even when the flock is talking about them behind their backs. And pastors know this phenomenon well. It's pretty common that what is for lunch on Sunday after church is roast pastor. Teachers and employers need to love and bless their students or employees even when they are not acting perfectly. In these cases, part of loving and blessing them is to admonish inferiors to do better. But that doesn't mean coming down on them with a sledgehammer. Likewise, this commandment tells us how we are to treat the clerk at the grocery store, the waitress in a restaurant, the flight attendant on an airplane. We don't get to come down on them just because we are having a bad day. Nor do we get to come down on them because they are having a bad day. A couple years ago, there was a spate of stories, mostly on social media, of course, about restaurant customers that were writing nasty things on their bill in place of the tip line. That is certainly prohibited in the fifth commandment. Kindly admonishing a person is one thing. Blasting them on social media is quite another. All of this reminds us of our sin. Our sin in not treating our inferiors, whomever that is, as we would treat our very own children. Our sin in not praying for them, for not loving them, and for not blessing them. It also reminds us of all the other ways that we have sinned, since the commandment is so broad that to mistreat inferiors becomes the same as having other gods, that is, ourselves, in place of the one true God. So violating the fifth commandment becomes a violation of the first commandment as well. I invite you, therefore, to kneel with me as you are able, confessing your sin in these matters, as well as your other sin privately, and then corporately as printed in the bulletin.